We are in the midst of the greatest economic breakdown crisis civilization has ever known. To lead the United States out of this crisis, we have supposedly been offered only two options for president, one crazier than the other, and both unfit for the job. Lyndon LaRouche has warned of this crisis repeatedly for decades.
This occurs at a time where the world monetary financial system is actually now currently in the process of disintegrating.
He recently promoted a strategy the United States government could adopt to stop the world's rapid descent into a new dark age, based on the best aspects of the United States history, of Lincoln and FDR, but it has fallen on deaf ears. No policymaker and neither of the two supposed candidates for president has addressed what LaRouche has offered, despite massive support on the local and state level. Are these officials stupid, suicidal, or perhaps miseducated? To begin, let us ask a most pertinent question. What is the Harvard Yard? This is the story behind the murder of the American intellectual tradition. Perhaps it is buried at Harvard University.
Harvard is in typical, I lived in that vicinity, knew a lot of Harvard contacts, and some of them were actually quite intelligent in those days. I would despair of finding that kind of intelligence that I saw 40, 50 years ago in that area anymore.
The real mission of the United States, as stated in the preamble of the Constitution, is the development of the individual and the improvement of life for all. In other words, the defense of the general welfare. From its inception, its universities were meant to promote the truth, and thus to be the first line of defense against the British Empire's degraded view of man.
And this, of course, was our tradition. It has been our tradition up to a very recent time. Look at our universities. What became our universities, beginning with Harvard University, which one time was a great university, the first and more important one in North America, but that had bad times too.
Harvard's history in relation to this mission is a tangled web woven across the decades preceding the Revolutionary War until the present day. When Harvard, the first college of the colonies, was founded, and came under the leadership of Increase Mather as its president, it was a great defender of what is rightly called the American intellectual tradition, which generated the conceptions of our country's founding documents. But Mather was displaced, as was the curriculum he advocated, and the university came to serve a mixed purpose during the Revolution itself, often acting as a hub for British and Tory actions against the Patriots, despite the number of revolutionary leaders who stepped forth from its brick buildings.
We had other universities were started. We had some of the greatest science in the world was practiced here. For example, Benjamin Franklin was actually a leading scientist of the world in his lifetime. His great-grandson, Alexander Dallas Bache, is typical in the 19th century of the continuity of that. It was from the United States that the greatest transformation of European civilization occurred in the late 19th century. Our victory over the British Confederacy inspired Europe, including the case of Bismarck, the case of Russia, these things. We were a source of it.
In the early 1800s, Harvard became the epicenter for the treason faction, the brazenly British allied perpetrators of multiple attempts to destroy the United States as a nation. Through the promotion of internal unrest, or even civil war, this faction enthusiastically vied for a role as imperial junior partner to the British Empire, run by the British East India Company.
All through this point, the empire interest in Europe, especially the British or the Anglo-Dutch liberal interest, has always been determined to destroy us. Not because we were people, but because we represented a threat to the empire. Our republican system, our sovereign nation state, and our devotion to science and culture. Well, the British said, corrupt them, destroy them, do everything possible to corrupt this thing. And they tried to destroy us with slavery. It didn't work. Then they said, we're going to destroy the whole world to get rid of this American influence, which threatens the empire. And that's not the British people. They certainly don't get much benefit out of this process. But it's from this Anglo-Dutch oligarchy, which continues this oligarchical tradition. They hate science. They hate the idea that ordinary people will have a scientific education, that the ordinary people will have a classical cultural civilization.
At moments, great leaders, fighters for humanity, have graduated from Harvard. But, unfortunately, Harvard has more often produced pestilential harbingers of mankind's doom.
Even in my lifetime, which is extended somewhat, from the time I returned from war to the present, there has been a progressive degeneration of the culture and of the universities of the United States. I complained about them when I was young, returning from the war. I always fought this educational system.
In the latter half of the 20th century, Harvard outdid itself in graduating gutless men and women, some truly evil, who would go on to hold leading positions in our government as well as within the governments of foreign nations. Through its crooked history, Harvard has, at key moments, been a tool of the good, having once chosen to champion the American system against empire. However, it has been consciously deployed to destroy the patriotic tradition and mission of the United States. The influence of H.G. Wells inside the prestigious institutions of our country, such as the case of former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who professed herself to be a loyal member of the H.G. Wells Society, typifies the manner in which British intelligence has acted to subvert our republic by taking over our institutions and making the defenders of the inalienable rights of man into accomplices in their eradication.